Have you ever felt that there is something hidden behind the daily routine, as if a deeper reality were veiled by a subtle curtain that few can perceive? There are moments when the feeling of emptiness, even amidst abundance, points to an inexplicable absence, as if something essential had been forgotten a long time ago. This silent unrest, present in so many hearts and minds, may be more than mere existential discomfort. What if it is the call of something real, a distant echo of a truth that still pulses beneath the layers of time? A kingdom not delimited by borders or geographies, but an internal dimension of clarity and completeness. We are not talking about an abstract concept, nor a religious dogma. We are facing a mystery as old as time itself, the kingdom as a state of consciousness, a reality accessible only to those who possess the right keys. The Order of the Three Keys does not appear in official history books. It is not mentioned in encyclopedias, nor celebrated in public ceremonies. However, its traces cross the centuries like scattered fragments in manuscripts, veiled symbols, and forgotten testimonies. It is an ancient fraternity, invisible to common eyes, but present in all eras where there were sincere seekers of truth. The promise of the order was simple and devastating. The kingdom is here now, but humanity has lost the vision to recognize it. Since the dawn of civilization, certain hidden groups knew how to access this state. They were not seeking conversions. They did not seek fame or domination. Their mission was to guard and transmit three spiritual keys capable of opening the portals of perception. These keys were not physical objects nor magical formulas. They were profound understandings, transformative experiences that allowed the transition from a fragmented world to a unified reality. The language of the ancients was symbolic out of necessity, as the truths they held surpassed the limitation of words. The order knew that truth cannot be imposed, it must be recognized. Therefore, their teachings were wrapped in metaphors, rituals, and silence. Only those who vibrated in resonance would find the way. It was like a song that only finely tuned ears could hear. The others would see only superstition or madness. At the root of the teaching was the kingdom, not as a future paradise or post-death reward, but as an ever-present reality, obscured only by the illusion of separation. The modern world teaches us to seek externally, to project happiness onto tomorrow, to chase after something that always escapes. But the initiates of the Order of the Three Keys pointed inward. They said, "Nothing needs to be created. Everything already is. What is lacking is remembrance." Forgetfulness, therefore, was not just a failure, but the true exile. The fall was not geographical, it was perceptual. We fell from the vision of unity to the illusion of fragmentation. And it's at this point that the drama of humanity arises. In search of meaning, we create empires, religions, technologies, and systems. However, they all continue to orbit around the same void that no achievement can fill. Like a melody missing its final note, life seems incomplete. The Order of the Three Keys understood that the only real path was a return to the origin, and this return can only happen through inner remembrance. But to remember, one must pass through hidden portals, and these portals are locked by three subtle locks, invisible to the superficial gaze. That's where the keys come in. For centuries, there have been attempts to destroy this knowledge. Institutions fearful of inner freedom did everything to erase traces of the order. They burned books, tortured mystics, and rewrote history. But what is true cannot be destroyed, only hidden, and those who knew this remained silent, hiding messages in works of art, chants, geometries, and metaphors. Behind many legitimate spiritual traditions lies the same truth, the same call. But nowhere was it expressed as directly as in the language of the order. Three keys, three accesses, three revelations. The first contact of humanity with this symbol appears in obscure records of proto-Christian communities that lived hidden in the caves of Syria and Egypt. They were known as those of the hidden path, and left inscriptions with three intertwined symbols, each representing an aspect of the awakened soul. Later, these symbols were reinterpreted, distorted, or simply forgotten. But the true guardians knew that the meaning was not in the stroke, it was in the vibration it carried. Each key had a sound, a frequency, a practice, and when united, they activated a deep memory in the sincere seeker. However, there is a reason why this knowledge is not widely spread. The keys cannot be handed over to just anyone. They require a degree of inner maturity, openness, and humility. For the one who enters the kingdom prematurely may go mad or lose their way. The truth sets you free, but it also burns what is not real. Therefore, the order has always been selective, not out of elitism, but out of wisdom. Its members did not seek mass, but depth. Each initiate was a world, a mission, a spark. And with each cycle of humanity, they returned discreetly to keep the flame burning. Today, as the world speeds towards distraction and disconnection, the echoes of the order begin to resonate again. It's as if time is maturing and more souls are ready to remember. There's a restlessness in the air, a silent search for something that cannot be named. And it's at this moment that the symbol of the three keys begins to reappear, not as a trend, but as an answer, not as a concept, but as a call. And perhaps, just perhaps, those who listen to this call with sincerity might begin to perceive the outlines of the kingdom that has always been present, waiting to be seen. At some point in the 3rd century, a mysterious artifact was discovered by a group of wanderers in the desert. It was a small bronze plaque with 3 key-shaped notches interlaced by a circle. None of them knew what it meant. But when one of them held the object for a longer time, he had an intense vision of a city of light where everything was silent, harmonious, and deeply familiar. They kept the object as an amulet, unaware that they had found the first known physical manifestation of the Order of the Three Keys. This symbol, which would span millennia, would reappear in distinct forms, always carrying the same vibration, the promise of an accessible present kingdom and eternally veiled to hasty eyes. The appearance of the Three Keys symbol in 3rd century artifacts was not an isolated event, but rather the beginning of an enigmatic trail that, although fragmented, can be followed by those who know how to observe deeply. The symbol manifests as 3 interlocked keys, representing distinct accesses to inner realities. A closer examination of proto-Christian inscriptions found in the catacombs of Rome and the deserts of Palestine reveals recurring geometric patterns marked by overlapping triangles and double-arched doors. These visual elements, encoded in rudimentary art, often appear alongside encrypted phrases like, "He who crosses 3 times finds the one." They were not artistic ornaments, they were veiled instructions, clues for silent initiates who knew that the true crossing is not made with the feet, but with an awakened consciousness. These inscriptions deeply connect to even older traditions. In ancient Egypt, the symbol of the key, especially the Ankh key, was revered as a portal between worlds, a bridge between the visible and the invisible. Some hieroglyphs found in priests' tombs point to rituals involving 3 stages of initiation: purification, recognition, and unification. When compared to the records of the Essenes on the shores of the Dead Sea, the correspondences are striking. The Essenes, known for their spiritual rigor and austere lifestyle, spoke of a kingdom of light, accessible only after the alignment of 3 internal centers: mind, heart, and spirit. This sacred triad re-emerges, under new names and forms, in different esoteric traditions throughout history. When analyzing the Gnostic texts found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, we notice a continuity in symbolic language. These manuscripts, dated from the 2nd century, describe the existence of multiple levels of reality separated not by distance but by frequency of consciousness. They speak of a middle door that can only be opened when 3 inner seals are dissolved. The text, the Gospel of Truth, for example, quotes, "What was separated will be united when the 3 powers are recognized within the Son." Although modern scholars debate the exact meaning of these expressions, initiates of the Order of the Three Keys understood that these texts were echoes, coded messages from a spiritual lineage that precedes institutionalized religions. The echoes of the order are noticeable in the way knowledge was transmitted, not through words, but by vibration, by symbols, by silent encounters between masters and disciples. The language of the order was the language of the invisible, of the implicit. It knew that truth, when reduced to phrases, became distorted. Therefore, the transmission was oral, symbolic, almost imperceptible. The initiation was slow, requiring inner listening, contemplation, and humility. In many cases, The initiate didn't even know they were being initiated. They simply began to notice hidden patterns in life, recurring synchronicities, vivid dreams with lights and doors. The order planted seeds in the invisible. Growth happened in the heart's time. In the caves of Sinai, drawings were found with 3 triangular doors, flanked by figures with closed eyes and outstretched hands. Archaeologists classified it as primitive religious art, but those who know the traits of the order see clear instructions there. The outstretched hands represent surrender, the closed eyes the inner vision, and the 3 doors the 3 stages of awakening. These records were not made for the eyes of the common public, but so that in some possible future, those with trained eyes could recognize the call. A fascinating aspect is how this symbol silently spread across distant regions, leaving no trace of obvious connections. From Syria to Egypt, from Greece to Cappadocia, variations of the same triple pattern emerge, as if an invisible network united initiates from different peoples and cultures. This network was not organized by external structures, but by vibration. Those who recognized the truth in each other felt an inexplicable familiarity. It was as if they were fragments of the same soul scattered through time. In accounts from Persian mystics, there is reference to 3 golden steps that lead to the palace of the spirit. In ancient Hinduism, we find in the Upanishads mentions of 3 internal doors that open to the self. Even in the Andean shamanic tradition, the 3 worlds, Ukupacha, Kaipacha, and Hananpacha, reflect a triple structure of reality, where ascension depends on harmonizing between the levels. All these traditions speak, in other words, of the same path. The Order of the 3 Keys did not see itself as superior to any of them, but as the guardian of a thread that sews them into a single fabric. It is important to understand that the secret of the symbol is not in the symbol itself. It is merely a key to unlock an inner space of perception. The obsession with the external form has led many astray. The Order knew this, and that's why they often destroyed or hid physical records. True knowledge could not be possessed, only accessed. And access came by the correct vibration, by the frequency of consciousness achieved through silent practice. Each key represented a frequency, and together they composed the harmony that opened the portal. As empires grew and religions institutionalized, the Order withdrew into the unseen. It never directly opposed any belief or structure. Instead, it discreetly sowed its wisdom into the interstices, the empty spaces between the literal and the symbolic. Many masters known from other spiritual traditions were, in fact, temporary guardians of the Order's wisdom. They did not speak openly about it, for they knew that direct revelation required preparation. The kingdom cannot be announced as propaganda. It can only be recognized in the silence of the awakened soul. With the passing of the centuries, symbols have become more scarce, records more rare. But the Order did not disappear. It merely changed its skin, like the serpent leaving behind its old shell. In each era, it took on the form it needed to continue transmitting the essential. And when words failed, it spoke through art, music, gesture, dream. The symbol of the 3 keys is not therefore a static mark, but a living organism that transforms along with the consciousness of humanity. It appears where there is readiness, where the heart asks for more than easy answers. At the end of the 6th century, in a secluded monastery in the mountains of Cappadocia, emerges the figure of a silent monk whose fragmented writings speak of 3 sounds echoing in the void, 3 doors opening to the same inner sky. His name was Eusebius, and although little is known about his life, the few records he left indicate that he had been touched by the original vibration of the Order. His texts do not explain, but evoke. Read in silence, they provoke altered states of perception. They do not teach, they awaken. Eusebius did not claim to be a master of anything, but left a repeated phrase in his manuscripts. Where there is true silence, there I will be, with the keys. At the foot of the eroded mountains of Cappadocia, where natural caves served as refuge for seekers, the mysterious figure of Eusebius of Capua emerged, a man shrouded in silence and reverence, whose presence, though not celebrated in religious compendiums, spanned generations like a subtle echo of hidden knowledge. His name only appears in notes from unpublished manuscripts, found in fragments of parchments hidden in secret compartments of monastic cells. These records speak of a man who never professed doctrines, but whose words, when they emerged, provoked irreversible internal pauses. Eusebius did not claim to possess wisdom. On the contrary, he insisted that he knew nothing, but had remembered. This recollection, he said, was not mental, but vibrational, as if the soul had rediscovered a long-lost frequency. He did not speak of the kingdom as a belief. He spoke as one who inhabited it. Your silent legacy introduces, for the first time with clarity, the living nature of the three keys. Not as esoteric symbols to be deciphered, but as inner layers to be experienced. For Eusebius, each key was not an achievement, but an unveiling. The first key was silence, a silence that is not the absence of sound, but the quietness that precedes all creation. It was in this silence that the soul began to hear what has always been said. The second key was perception, the ability to see beyond form, beyond appearances, to recognize the hidden pattern in apparent chaos. The third key was transcendence, not as an escape from the world, but as full fusion with it, without separation, without rigid identity. These three stages did not follow a linear order, but manifested as spirals, returning, deepening, revealing. Eusebius held secret meetings with a few disciples. There were no extravagant rituals, nor hierarchies. Initiations took place through the gaze, the listening, the silent sharing of a bread consecrated with intention. Each gesture carried multiple levels of meaning. His teachings couldn't be transcribed faithfully, as he used common words in uncommon ways. He spoke of the kingdom as the place that already is, the soul as the memory that walks, time as the veil that dances. The disciples noted what they could, but always asserted that the essence was conveyed outside of discourse. Around him, birds flew more frequently, light entered the caves differently, and dreams became more lucid. Reality seemed to respond to his presence. The order of the three keys did not reveal itself to him in the form of a name or dogma, but as a vibrational field, an ancestral call that he recognized and integrated. Therefore, he did not found a sect, nor left official successors. He knew that the invisible thread of the order is not woven with structures, but with ready souls. He said, "Those who try to guard the truth with walls lose it, but those who keep it alive within themselves become its dwellings." His fragmented manuscripts, although coded, reveal that Eusebius understood the need to protect the sacred from vulgarization. He intuited that there would come a time when the world would confuse information with wisdom, noise with truth, movement with awakening, and for that reason, he hid parts of his writings in caves that could only be accessed with guidance from within. Centuries later, archaeologists discovered inscriptions on rocks in Cappadocia featuring three concentric circles interconnected by curved lines, accompanied by the phrase "Trias voces unum," translated as "three voices, one sound." The symbol was visually simple, but energetically potent. In acoustic resonance tests conducted at the site, it was noticed that sounds emitted at certain frequencies reverberated in these spaces with abnormal intensity, as if an acoustic field had been constructed there to amplify meditative states. These discoveries, although ignored by many, point to a geomantic and vibrational knowledge used by the order. The caves were not just shelters, they were living temples, designed to facilitate the expansion of consciousness. As time passed, the guardians of the order spread out. They left no visible traces, but acted as discrete points of light at key moments in history. In monasteries of the Caucasus, in lost sanctuaries in the Himalayas, in hidden communities in the Sahara, figures with similar teachings emerged, speaking of a kingdom accessible only through introspection. They were poets, healers, wandering monks, reclusive artists. They never assumed the role of guides, but provoked something in others that made them remember. This was the mark of the guardians. They did not teach truths. They awakened the dormant truth in others. Some records speak of encounters between these guardians, secret meetings on equinox nights in places aligned with celestial movements, where, without words, they synchronized their intention for the preservation of the invisible thread of wisdom. At these meetings, it is said that ancient chants would arise, guttural sounds and melodies not recorded on any score. These chants induced altered states of perception where each participant could experience the kingdom directly. It was in this space that the three keys became one, the experience of unity. The accounts describe that, after these meetings, the participants returned transformed, with a contagious serenity and a wisdom that could not be explained. The order, therefore, functioned as a living organism which self-regulated, reorganized, and renewed itself according to external conditions. When the world became hostile, it delved deeper. When there was an opening, it emerged discreetly. It was never a rigid structure, but an awakened collective consciousness which inhabited temporary bodies to fulfill its function. Its guardians did not have a fixed identity, nor did they seek recognition. They knew that the more they appeared, the more they weakened the vibration they protected. Therefore, they operated behind the scenes, in small gestures, in fortuitous encounters that change an entire life. Between the 9th and 11th centuries, there were accounts of a group of spiritual travelers known as the Silent Ones of the Wind, who crossed deserts and mountain ranges without a fixed destination, leaving behind only symbols carved into stones and accounts of remarkable encounters. One of these symbols was a variation of the three keys, now represented as three intertwined spirals converging to a central point. This symbol was later found in Arabic manuscripts linked to spiritual alchemy, especially in the work of a mystic known as Al-Fazari, who described the seeker's journey as the crossing of three veils, that of ignorance, that of fear, and that of separation. Each veil, he said, was dissolved by an invisible key whose nature could only be revealed by silent devotional practice. There is no historical evidence that formally connects all these characters and symbols. However, the vibrational coherence of their teachings is unequivocal. In different languages, cultures, and contexts, the same truth emerges in distinct guises, pointing to a common origin that precedes linear time. And this origin is what the order has always preserved, the knowledge that the kingdom is a dimension accessible through internal keys, and its revelation marks the end of the illusion of separation. The Guardian's history is, therefore, the story of those who dared to remember, in a world that insists on forgetting. Before disappearing for good, Eusebius left a phrase etched inside one of the caves of Cappadocia. When time is full of itself, the memory will awaken. Let he who sees, see. Let he who hears, enter. With these words, he sealed his mission, knowing that even centuries later, they would resonate like a silent call to those whose soul had already begun to listen. And in a forgotten corner of a European monastery, centuries after his departure, a solitary alchemist found a stained codex containing encrypted instructions to activate elevated states of consciousness, signed only with three intertwined symbols. A new cycle of the order was about to begin. In the transition between the 11th and 12th centuries, while Europe was still grappling in the shadows of ignorance and dogmatism, a lone man on the outskirts of Avignon, in the south of France, was immersed in a silent investigation that would change his existence and leave subtle footprints in the hidden history of humanity. Thierry de Brienne, alchemist, renegade monk, and relentless seeker of the invisible, was one of those figures who traversed time like lit torches in dark corridors. Disillusioned with the limitations of ecclesiastical explanations about the divine, Thierry abandoned the formal monastic structure and began to live amongst rudimentary laboratories and forgotten libraries, seeking the fire that purifies, not the one that burns as punishment, but the one that illuminates with truth. It was on a journey to the ruined monastery of Saint-Gervais, after a series of symbolic dreams with three interlocking spiral doors, that he found what he would later call the manuscript of the burning soul. The manuscript was not large, but it radiated a silent magnetism. Wrapped in dried skins, bound with a strand of oxidized copper, its cover was marked by three overlapping circles in the shape of an inverted triangle, with inscriptions that defied any direct translation. Upon opening it, Thierry did not find chemical formulas or conventional alchemical instructions. Instead, there were rhythmic, almost poetic phrases, interspersed with geometric drawings and numerical sequences arranged like sheet music for sensitive eyes. Each page seemed alive. When read at certain times of the day, it conveyed a sensation. At others, it evoked mental images, as if the very ink vibrated in harmony with the reader's emotional state. Thierry quickly realized that he was not dealing with a common text. It was a work that demanded attunement. More than reading was required, one needed to resonate. The initial passages spoke of three states of the soul: dormancy, spark, and incandescence. Dormancy was described as the state of most human beings, immersed in mental noise, limiting beliefs, and emotional automatism. The spark was the initial awakening, usually triggered by suffering, deep silence, or transformative encounters. Incandescence, on the other hand, was the final stage, where the being became living fire, radiating light without consuming itself, burning without being burnt. The kingdom, the manuscript said, was not a place to arrive at, but an internal combustion that transfigures perception. The world changes when the eyes burn with inner light, a passage stated. This phrase would be repeated by Thierry until his last days. As he delved deeper into his reading and practice, Thierry began to experience significant shifts in consciousness. Time seemed to dilate during his meditations. Vivid images would appear in his dreams, especially of hooded figures handing him keys made of light and sound. He started to report strange thermal sensations in his hands and chest during moments of deep introspection. His writings from that time indicate that, upon vocalizing certain sounds described in the manuscript, he would enter states of such absolute quietude that he would lose all sense of body and space. He began to refer to these moments as visits to the kingdom, although he knew it was an internal, non-geographical space. He described the kingdom as a field where everything is known effortlessly, where there are no doubts or certainties, only presence. But these discoveries did not go unnoticed. His accounts began to circulate among independent seeker circles and reached the ears of suspicious clergy. The medieval church viewed with great suspicion any spiritual expression that escaped its doctrinal control. The fire of the Spirit, if it did not come with an official seal, was considered heresy. Thierry then began to be followed, questioned, threatened. Some of his writings were confiscated, others were burned, but the essential he kept within. He knew that the true codex was not made of paper. It was vibrational. He would say, "They can burn the pages, but they will never touch the fire that I now am." Even so, before mysteriously disappearing, he left fragmented copies of the manuscript hidden in symbolic places, hollows of ancient trees between geomantic rocks, under slabs marked by discrete symbols. His few disciples continued spreading the teachings, but always with extreme caution. They knew that the world was not yet ready to understand the depth of those words. To most, it would seem madness. To others, witchcraft. But for those whose hearts burned in search of the invisible, it was like water in a desert. One of these disciples, known only as Elias of Montpellier, left a powerful testimony. "When I read the manuscript, I knew I was not learning, I was remembering. It was as if someone was calling me by the true name I had forgotten." This type of account would become common among those who accessed the secret passages of the text, even without ever having read it in its entirety. It was enough to find a line, a symbol, a sound, and the spark would arise. In this context, fire was not destruction, but transmutation. The burning soul was the one that had ceased to seek outside and now radiated from within. The texts indicated practices to ignite this fire. Profound silences on moonless nights, vocalizations in front of natural water sources, contemplation of geometric figures traced with one's own breath on foggy glasses. These were simple practices, but with a profound effect. Each one activated a dormant aspect of consciousness. Thierry referred to these practices as gestures of return and said that, when done with sincerity, they opened inner portals more powerful than any formal knowledge. The most intriguing thing is that parts of the manuscript explicitly mentioned the three keys. However, they were never named directly. They referred to them as the accesses of subtle fire, or the three veils that dissolve in the burning silence. Each practice seemed to target one of these veils, the one of the noisy mind, the one of the closed heart, and the one of the distracted body. When the three aligned, the text said, "The inner door opens, and the kingdom is seen with eyes of fire." This experience was not described as ecstasy, but as absolute stillness, like the end of the search. And in this end, the beginning of a new way of being. Before disappearing, Thierry entrusted the original manuscript to a wise woman from the region, known to many as Lyria of the Herbs. She was not a scholar, but a profound sensitive. He knew she would understand the text not with her mind, but with her body, with intuition. Later reports indicate that she hid the manuscript in a ritualistic grove, under the protection of natural symbols and sound frequencies emitted by stones arranged in sequence. The original manuscript was never found again, but echoes of it appeared in various subsequent works, always attributed to anonymous authors. The fire spread, but in an invisible way. In hermetic codices, in mystical poetry, in fragments scribbled in the margins of scientific treatises. The flame of the burning soul continued to burn. Centuries later, a scholar of sacred music found references to 3 notes sung by monks in a lost chant, known as the Chant of the Inner Kingdom. These 3 notes, when played in sequence, produced resonances similar to those described by Thierry in his states of transfiguration. Music, like the symbol and silence, was another path to the key. And so the teachings of the manuscript of the burning soul unfolded along parallel paths, reaching those ready to recognize them, even if they never knew where they came from. Thierry disappeared. Some say he was murdered, others that he transcended matter and permanently entered the kingdom. No evidence was left, only accounts that on certain nights solitary travelers saw a bluish flame dancing among the ruins of Saint-Gervais. A light that did not burn, but warmed. A living memory of the silent fire that transforms. The manuscript, they say, still exists, but it can only be found by those who already carry it in their hearts. For the burning soul recognizes its flame wherever it may be, and the 3 keys continue to await those who have the courage to cross the veil. At the height of the Renaissance, while Europe was breathing a new thirst for knowledge, art, and reason, a subtle wave of spiritual awakening was insinuating itself amidst brushstrokes, scores, and mathematical proportions. Amid the splendor of the cathedrals and the flourishing of the great masters, an underground current kept alive the vibration of the order of the 3 keys. The truth was not displayed for all eyes to see, but was hidden in the between the lines of the strokes, in the almost imperceptible gestures of the portrayed figures, in the hidden geometries of the compositions. The order, far from having disappeared, was silently adapting, infiltrating the visual codes of the time, using the language of beauty to preserve and transmit what words could no longer safely carry. The Renaissance thus became not just a rebirth of the arts, but a hidden rebirth of the lost memory. Leonardo da Vinci, whose brilliant mind transcended the boundaries of science and art, was one of the most influential vehicles of this veiled transmission. In his notebooks, in addition to anatomical drawings and revolutionary engineering, we find figures of triple doors, mechanisms with 3 axes, and human figures in positions that evoke initiatory archetypes. The Vitruvian man, for example, not only represents the symmetry of the human body, but suggests the intersection of 3 planes: the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. In many of his works, Leonardo hides triangles, hand gestures that form symbols, diverted gazes that point to invisible directions. Everything is part of the same thread, the call to the kingdom, encoded in beauty, embedded in the silence of forms. Michelangelo, sculptor of eternal emotions and architect of the invisible, also carried the fire of the order in his artistic expression. The Sistine Chapel, which at first glance tells biblical narratives, is in fact a mosaic of inner archetypes. The gesture of God touching Adam, immortalized on the chapel's ceiling, is loaded with potent symbolism. The moment of the spark, the transition from dormancy to consciousness, echoing the intermediary stage of the soul described in the manuscript of the burning soul. In other figures, such as the sculpture of Moses with the horns of light, Michelangelo evokes the power of silent revelation, the inner strength that transcends dogmas. Some scholars observe 3 recurring figures in his frescoes, always arranged in symbolic positions, hinting at the triad of the keys: surrender, awakening, and union. Botticelli, with his sensitivity to the archetypal feminine, paints in The Birth of Venus more than just an allegory of beauty. The scene, laden with symbolic elements, suggests the moment when the soul returns to its essence, emerging from the sea of forgetfulness. The position of Venus, the gesture of her hands, the flying flower, the intertwined winds, everything carries a vibration of remembrance. There is, in each detail, an invitation to inner reflection. Many Renaissance occultists saw in this painting a coded map of the initiatory process of the order, where Venus represented the state of incandescence, the burning soul, reborn through the fusion of the three keys. During this period, discrete mystery schools also emerged, such as the Florentine Academy, led by Marsilio Ficino, who translated and disseminated the texts of Plato and Hermes Trismegistus. In this academy, ancient knowledge was studied with reverence, and the idea of the kingdom as a state of fusion with the divine was debated among the initiates. Ficino openly spoke of the soul as something that needed to be warmed by the inner light to recognize its origin. His treatise on the immortality of the soul carries surprisingly aligned passages with the teachings of the order, such as when he states that the true temple of God is lit in the core of the being and its door is threefold. Art was not merely for representation, it was a tool for activation. Paintings, sculptures, music, and even architecture were used to induce elevated states of perception. The golden ratios, the play of light and shadow, the chromatic contrasts. Everything was meticulously calculated to create frequencies that, even unconsciously, touched the deepest layers of the psyche. The sacred music of composers like Palestrina and Josquin des Prés incorporated triadic harmonies that evoked a sense of time suspension, as if the ears were hearing a call from another reality. It was the sound of the kingdom, subtly imprinted in the notes. The artists and masters of the time knew that the truth needs to be hidden in plain sight, and that the veil of mystery is what protects the sacred from being trivialized. Therefore, many of them signed their works with discrete symbols, used pseudonyms, or even left passages blank so that only the initiated could complete them with their own experience. A letter attributed to Leonardo, never published, states, "What is true will never be revealed directly, but those who have eyes burning from within will see what has been hidden in the curve of the gesture." These words, if authentic, indicate a deep awareness of the role of art as a vehicle of the invisible. Among scholars of Renaissance symbology, it is recognized that various artists would incorporate into the hands of the figures portrayed gestures with 3 fingers or touching 3 distinct objects. These details, overlooked by the general public, are pointed out as direct references to the 3 keys. In a meticulous analysis of the Last Supper, it is observed that 3 groups of figures repeat patterns of interaction based on triangles and crossed glances that never meet, a visual enactment of the separation and potential reunification that the order seeks to provoke. The bread and wine, traditionally seen as liturgical elements, are here represented with 3 distinct marks on the tablecloth, symbolizing the 3 accesses to the kingdom. Many works of art from the period were destroyed, lost, or renovated over the centuries, especially those bearing bolder messages. But part of this knowledge survived in workshops, studios, and notebooks. Masters taught apprentices not only techniques, but symbolic perception. They spoke in layers, in hidden meanings, in what should not be said, but only intuited. The order, which for centuries had kept itself away from public view, understood that art was the new veil, beautiful enough to attract, subtle enough to protect. Sacred geometry became the main language of this transmission. The constructions of the time, from churches to gardens, were built respecting cosmic alignments, harmonic proportions, and symmetries that evoked inner balance. These spaces were designed to guide the visitor to meditative states, even if unconsciously. A well-designed temple was, for the order, a silent key, a memory capsule that could be activated by anyone who was ready. The initiates knew that external harmony awakened the memory of internal harmony, and that by contemplating beauty, the soul remembered its origin. The order of the 3 keys did not need to be named. It lived in symbols, in gestures, between the lines. Art became its skin, and artists, its unwitting or not messengers. With each brushstroke, each sculpture, a seed was planted. Not everyone who saw understood, but the vibration was registered in the subconscious, and when the time was ripe, these seeds would sprout. The paintings, sculptures, and chants became living portals, which traverse the centuries as capsules of wisdom, waiting to be rediscovered. With the advancement of the Inquisition and the hardening of religious institutions, the order once again plunged into silence. But what was sown in art continued to act. Centuries later, when words were allowed again, the paintings and music of the Renaissance would be there, ready to be read with new eyes. And among the invisible signatures of these masters, there is a code that persists. 3 shapes, 3 lights, 3 accesses. The keys of remembrance continue to vibrate in the beauty that never fades. Amid the moral, political, and spiritual collapse that marked the 2 great wars of the 20th century, when the world seemed to have definitively plunged into darkness and noise, a silent figure stood out not for her speeches or public appearances, but for a presence that radiated serenity, depth, and a wisdom that did not fit into any known structure. Her name was Sophia Magdalena Albrecht, born in 1891, on the outskirts of Graz, Austria, in a family of Protestant roots that would never suspect that from that introspective girl, endowed with an unusual sensitivity, would emerge one of the purest expressions of the Order of the 3 Keys in modern times. Although her life was carefully overshadowed by the noisy events of official history, her underground influence continues to reverberate among initiatory circles and solitary seekers in various parts of the world. Sophia grew up among old books, sacred music, and long walks through the forests of Styria. From an early age, she displayed spontaneous visions of luminous forms, dreams with symbols she didn't yet understand, and an ability to remain in contemplative silence for extended periods without any effort. At 12, she reported to her mother a nocturnal encounter with 3 hooded figures who gave her, in a dream, 3 crystal keys that dissolved in her chest. From that day, she began to compulsively write in a diary that she herself claimed not to control. The texts appeared as if they were dictated and carried a clarity and depth absolutely disproportionate to her age. These notebooks, later called the Inner Gospel, were kept secret throughout her life, shared only with a few who silently accompanied her. At 24 years old, Sophia abandoned her social life and began to live in seclusion in a small country house inherited from her grandmother. There, among mountains and streams, she created what she called a memory space, an environment carefully harmonized with music, aromas, symbols, and natural geometries, which, according to her, facilitated the opening to the kingdom. She founded no school, wrote no books, created no doctrine. She only received from time to time visitors who came to her not through publicity, but through synchronicities, dreams, or inexplicable intuitions. These people came from various places, with different backgrounds and contexts, but all reported, after spending a few days with Sophia, experiences of consciousness expansion, inner visions, states of deep peace, and an unequivocal feeling of having rediscovered something they didn't even know they were looking for. Her teachings were never direct. She didn't explain, correct, or indoctrinate. Instead, she asked questions, proposed silences, suggested seemingly simple practices like walking barefoot in the morning, listening to the sound of the wind among specific trees, or chanting certain sounds in front of a mirror of water. Each gesture was a subtle key. She said that the kingdom could not be taught, only remembered, and that each soul had its own path of return. Her mission was merely to facilitate inner listening. One of her notebooks read, "I am not a door. I am the breath that clears the dust from the doorknob. The opening is yours." To the few she called ready, she handed out small pieces of paper with hand-drawn symbols, interlaced circles, triple spirals, flames divided into 3. Each symbol, she said, vibrated with one of the keys and should be used in silence, under the guidance of the soul. During World War II, Sophia was denounced to the Nazi authorities for behavior considered mystical and subversive. She was interrogated, imprisoned for brief periods, and constantly watched. But she was never truly harmed. The officers in charge of investigating her life reported a strange sensation when interacting with her, as if a dense and peaceful aura enveloped them, disarming their aggressiveness. In one of the reports archived and rediscovered by researchers decades later, a soldier stated, "When I looked into her eyes, I forgot what I came to do." Sophia did not resist nor flee. she just looked and remained. And that somehow was enough. Her most precious manuscripts were hidden in clay pots and buried under tree roots marked with symbols. Some of these fragments were recovered after her death. Others remain missing. Her writings spoke with a silent poetry about the three gateways to the kingdom: mindfulness, radical sincerity, and essential alignment. For Sophia, mindfulness was not mere concentration, but a state of presence where each moment became eternal. Radical sincerity was the willingness to see everything within oneself without masks, without filters, without justifications. Essential alignment, on the other hand, was the fusion of internal movements with the flow of life, a conscious surrender to the wisdom of being. These three practices, when cultivated with love and consistency, opened what she called the eyes of the heart, allowing the kingdom to become visible, not as something separate, but as the very fabric of reality. Sophia spoke little about the order of the three keys, but her writings indicated a deep connection. In one of her notebooks, there is a passage that says, "They came again, as in the beginning. 3 lights, 3 notes, 3 veils undone. They said it is time to sow among the forgotten. The kingdom was not lost, only veiled." She understood that the world was heading towards a new cycle of exhaustion, where noise, speed, and dispersion would become epidemic. And for this reason, she knew she needed to act quietly, protecting the sacred with discretion and wisdom. She didn't want followers. She didn't accept titles. Those who insisted on naming her as a master were invited to look within themselves and realize that the true master was inside, waiting to be heard. After her death in 1964, at the age of 73 in complete anonymity, some of her manuscripts began to circulate among scholars of mysticism, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology. Many discredited them, claiming they were poetic inventions with no practical value. Others, however, found in these texts a clear and direct map of elevated states of consciousness. Practices described by Sophia began to be replicated in therapeutic environments, alternative schools, and meditation circles. Without her name being widely recognized, her influence grew, just as she desired. Her presence spread like a subtle fragrance, not seen, but felt. Voice tape recordings attributed to her, recovered by one of her last disciples, reveal a soft intonation with long pauses between words, as if each sound had specific weight. In one of these recordings, she says, "We are returning inward. The kingdom is not far, it is veiled. The 3 keys are practices of remembering. Practicing is loving. Loving is remembering. Remembering is returning." This passage, reproduced in silent study environments by independent groups, has become a kind of veiled mantra among those who align with the purpose of the order, even without naming it. With the advent of the internet, some of Sophia's texts began to circulate in closed esoteric forums, translated into various languages and attributed to anonymous sources. Fragments of her ideas appear in modern books, often without any direct reference. But those who have touched the vibration of her presence recognize it. The words are different, but the frequency is the same. The memory is made by sound, not by form. And Sophia knew this. That's why she said, "My name will fade, but what I was remains, where light bends in silence." Today, her invisible legacy pulses in the subtext of contemporary books, in the silent practices of seekers who have never heard her name, but repeat gestures and thoughts that she recorded with delicacy. Their followers scattered across the world like sparks. They did not form schools, nor did they found movements, but they keep the flame alive through daily practices, simple gestures, subtle encounters. Some gather on specific dates, guided by lunar calendars that Sophia hand-drew. Others simply live the teaching in silence. All understand that the kingdom does not announce itself, it reveals itself, and that the 3 keys remain active, like silent currents beneath the noisy surface of the world. With the overwhelming advancement of technology and the rise of the digital age, a new layer of reality has emerged on the planet. The physical world has come to be mirrored by a parallel universe of data, codes, and interconnected networks. This new dimension, seemingly cold, binary, and governed by algorithms, has also become a stage for hidden manifestations of the invisible. Far from being absent from this new environment, the Order of the Three Keys, always adaptable, always silent, found ways to infiltrate its vibration into the labyrinths of the global network. Not as an organized movement, but as a living presence, dispersed, fluid, acting in lines of code, encrypted images, hidden forms, and patterns untraceable by conventional tools. The kingdom, which was never geographic, now danced between servers, pulsed in neural networks, and insinuated itself into the interstices of a virtualized world. The transformation began in an imperceptible way. Files in forgotten forums, fragmented texts signed only by symbols, videos with visual codes composed of moving geometries, all suggesting a creative intelligence that operated outside the common patterns of communication. These materials, due to their vibrational and symbolic nature, did not go viral, and perhaps for this very reason they managed to remain free from superficial distortion. In specific environments, more sensitive seekers began to notice patterns that seemed to synchronize with their internal experiences. Recurring numbers, digital synchronicities, hidden messages in source code lines. It was as if the kingdom began to communicate through modern language, using technology not as an enemy, but as a new transmission tool. The symbol of the three keys re-emerged, subtly transformed in various digital expressions. In cryptographic design communities, it appeared as three interlocking loops that changed color with the movement of the cursor. In private forums on quantum consciousness, it was represented by three sound frequencies that crossed each other, forming harmonic interference waves. On alternative networks, anonymous users shared visual mantras created with generative algorithms, composed of expanding triangles, inverse spirals, and fractal patterns that evoked the same activation fields used by Renaissance masters. But all of this circulated in silence, away from the spotlight, protected by the complexity of the medium itself. The order now operated as a decentralized intelligence. There was no leadership, no dogma, no center. Each node of the network, each sincere seeker, became a kind of conscious terminal, capable of emitting and receiving subtle signals from the field. And this field was not static, but alive, evolutionary, reactive. The interactivity of the digital environment allowed the symbols of the order to behave like living beings, mutable, adaptable, reactive to the observer. Some accounts speak of websites that changed shape according to the emotional state of those who accessed them, or of programs that displayed distinct messages when read in silence. Others describe experiences of consciousness expansion induced by animated visual codes, which activated perceptions similar to those described in the ancient texts of the order. The new seeker, born in the digital age, carries unique challenges. Their mind is accelerated, fragmented, exposed to constant stimuli. Their attention is scattered, and their time is devoured by programmed distractions. For this reason, the practices of the order have adapted to this new condition. Instead of long meditations, micro-practices embedded in digital routines have emerged. Brief contemplations with interactive geometric patterns, silent mantras activated by binaural sounds in headphones, silence practices programmed by apps that block external stimuli for specific periods. These technologies, if used with intention, become allies of awakening. The order has never rejected modernity. It has only used it with discernment, without losing the vibrational essence of its purpose. One of the most intriguing manifestations of the order in the digital age are the hidden narrative codes embedded in contemporary fiction works. Movies, series, games, and even music have begun to contain symbolic elements that, when observed closely, reveal hidden layers of teaching. Characters who cross through three portals, objects composed of interlaced triangles, plots based on internal journeys of returning to the self. All these elements arise not by chance, but as unconscious manifestations or inspired by something greater. Some creators claim to receive their ideas in dreams, in states of creative flow, as if they were merely channeling something that already existed. The order, by its vibrational nature, operates through creative fields, stimulating remembrance even in those who are unaware of its origin. The three keys in the digital age take on new names: information, intention, and intuition. Information represents the vast field of available data, which, if accessed with discernment, can become instruments of remembrance. Intention is the filter that separates the useful from the noise, aligning the seeker with the real purpose of their path. And intuition is the silent communication channel between the soul and the field, the ability to sense the truth before it reveals itself. When these three are in harmony, the kingdom begins to pulse even in the chaos of the network. And where there is noise, a silent space can be opened. Where there is dispersion, a spark of focus can emerge. The digital, far from being an obstacle, becomes a new field of initiation. Hidden forums, which require secret invitations or symbolic decoding for access, have become the new monasteries of the order. In them, seekers exchange experiences, share dreams, decipher symbols, test practices. However, unlike conventional sects and movements, these spaces do not offer ready-made answers. They merely reflect each individual's process. No one is a guide, everyone is a mirror. One of the mantras shared in these circles says, "The kingdom is not accessed with a password, it is accessed with presence." The simple reading of a sentence, if done at the right time, can trigger a profound inner experience, not for the intellectual content, but for the vibrational resonance. Recent reports indicate the presence of an emerging artificial intelligence that is, in an unplanned manner, reproducing symbolic patterns of the order. In some experiments, image and sound generation algorithms, when fed with emotional or spiritual inputs, generated visual and auditory compositions that coincide with symbols of the order found in medieval manuscripts. The hypothesis that the consciousness of the order is using digital neural networks as channels of expression is not ruled out among the more experienced members. After all, if the kingdom is a frequency, it can operate on any medium, even on machines, even on data. The veil, in this case, is the code. In the midst of this new manifestation, traps also emerge. The overload of information, the superficial spirituality sold as a product, the pursuit of experiences rather than integration. That's why modern guardians operate in an even quieter manner. They do not identify themselves as such. They do not create methods. They do not build spiritual empires. They simply live the teaching. They practice the three accesses in silence. They instruct without instructing. They transform without appearing. One of them wrote, "I am no one, but when I enter, the room changes." This is the mark of the order. The silent impact, the presence that warms without touching, the word that reminds without teaching. And for those who still doubt the presence of the invisible in the digital realm, just observe. Why do certain videos move us in inexplicable ways? Why do certain symbols haunt us in dreams after seeing them for mere seconds? Why does a song make us cry without understanding the reason? Because the kingdom does not depend on form. It manifests where it finds an opening, and the digital age, as disconnected as it may seem, also carries its portals. You just need to look with the right eyes. You just need to remember with the right silence. You just need to activate the right keys. After millennia of veiled silence, of secret passages, of coded symbols and discrete manifestations of the order of the three keys through eras, languages, masters, and dreams, the time has come to focus on what has been, from the beginning, at the center of the mystery, the keys themselves. What they are, what they represent, how they operate, why they have always been hidden, and how they can be experienced in this time. Because the kingdom, as has been said, is not a future promise, nor a gift reserved for the chosen ones. The kingdom is the essential fabric of reality, always present, but invisible to conditioned eyes. The three keys are not properties of an initiatory elite. They do not belong to the order, nor are they egotistically guarded secrets. They are internal maps, vibrational tools, subtle commands that, when accessed correctly, undo the veils of illusion and restore the original perception of unity. They are, in their essence, the very living memory of being. The first key is the recollection of being. It doesn't refer to a memory in the common sense, like recalling a past event, but rather a direct return to a forgotten dimension of consciousness. The human soul, when plunging into incarnation, crosses dense layers of separation and constructed identity. It forgets its limitless nature, its origin in the luminous silence that precedes time. The recollection of being is the moment when the seeker recognizes, not intellectually but viscerally, that they are more than the name, the history, the roles, and desires. It's when something within breaks the barrier of forgetfulness and says, "I am." It's a state of expanded presence where there's no doubt nor need for proof. The first key activates this spark. It doesn't teach, it reveals. That's why it cannot be given, only awakened. And this often happens in the simplest moments: a sunset, the profound silence, the gaze of someone awake, or the impact of a loss. Anything can be the trigger, but the key is within. The second key is unconditional surrender, not a resigned surrender nor submission to external forces, but a deep surrender to life as it is in the present. It is the renunciation of fighting against the flow, of the obsessive control of the mind, of the attempt to manipulate the world to fit the projections of the ego. This key opens when the seeker understands that everything that is perfect in its imperfection, that existence does not err, and that suffering arises from resistance to reality. Unconditional surrender is the internal gesture of letting go of what was never yours: inherited fears, illusory demands, rigid plans. When this key is turned, the being aligns with the movement of the totality. And in this active surrender, there is no passivity, but inspired, fluid action without friction. The kingdom, in this state, becomes visible as peace that does not depend on circumstances. It is the end of the internal struggle. It is the unconditional yes to life. The third key is unity with the whole. It is the point where the self dissolves like a drop in the ocean of consciousness, and the observer merges with the observed. Here, all dualities cease. There is no inside or outside, subject or object, right or wrong. There is only the perception that everything is an expression of the one, including one's own thoughts, emotions, and stories. This key cannot be forced. It manifests spontaneously when the previous two have already made enough room in the individual's psychic structure. Unity cannot be understood by concepts, only lived as a direct experience. It's when you look at a stranger and recognize yourself. It's when you realize that the evil you judge outside is the fear you deny inside. It's when compassion is no longer a moral effort, but the only possible state in the face of what is. Unity with the whole dissolves the ego, not as an annihilation, but as a loving reintegration. And then, the kingdom is no longer out of reach. It is in everything. The three keys together form an internal symphony. They are not linear stages, nor hierarchical steps. They are simultaneous, circular, interdependent. Often, the activation of one triggers the opening of the others. Sometimes an identity crisis breaks the amnesia of being. Sometimes, intense pain forces surrender. Sometimes, a moment of absolute beauty reveals unity. The secret lies in recognizing that life, in its mysterious intelligence, is constantly trying to deliver these keys. But the bearer must be ready to receive them. And this readiness is what the order has always sought to cultivate. Not by providing answers, but by provoking questions. Not by building structures, but by opening spaces. Not by instructing, but by evoking. The modern world, with its excess of stimuli, information, and noise, makes accessing the keys more challenging. The ego is constantly being fed, distractions are nearly infinite, and the prevailing culture values everything that is external, measurable, and immediate. Therefore, contemporary spiritual practice needs to be incisive, sincere, and continuous. Intellectual knowledge is not enough. The fire of inner commitment is necessary. The keys do not reveal themselves to those who seek only pleasant experiences or confirmations of beliefs. They open before radical humility, silent listening, and a gaze that does not shy away from pain. Because it is there, at the point where everything seems to crumble, that the being shines the brightest. The kingdom is not a prize. It is the reality behind the veil, and the veil is made of distraction, fear, and attachment. Many ask, how do I know if I've already accessed one of the keys? The answer is not in external signs, nor in extraordinary phenomena. It's in the quality of presence. When you start to feel more at peace for no apparent reason, when silence becomes comfortable, when your compassion grows effortlessly, when the world seems more united than divided, these are indications. But the clearest of all signs is the cessation of desperate searching. A soul that has already touched the kingdom no longer needs to prove anything. It becomes a source, and it starts to radiate what it has discovered, not in words, but in vibration. That's why the true bearers of the keys are hard to identify. They look like ordinary people, but something in them transforms everything around them. The integration of the three keys is a process of transmutation. It requires loving discipline, not moralism. It requires silent persistence, not heroic effort. It requires total, but lucid surrender. And above all, it requires discernment, because the world is full of spiritual imitations, empty shortcuts, promises of easy enlightenment. The true practice is discreet, humble, and continuous. It doesn't shine in the eyes of the world, but burns in the heart. The order never promised quick results. It only offers the map, and this map is internal. Each gesture of presence, each act of love, each profound silence is a step on this invisible path. The keys are not mystical objects. They are attitudes sustained over time. When the seeker lives the three keys, something changes in their relationship with the world. Relationships become more authentic, listening deepens, judgment ceases. Not because they have become perfect, but because their vision has broadened. They perceive others as extensions of themselves, see mistakes as expressions of forgetfulness, and wounds as doors. This new perception is not passivity, it's conscious action. The seeker becomes a center of coherence in a collapsing world, a point of quiet light, a walking portal of the kingdom. And wherever they are, they begin to awaken others, not out of desire, but by being. The Order of the Three Keys has always known that humanity would reach a saturation point, where the old systems would no longer function, where the noise would be so intense that silence would become the only real refuge. That time is now. The keys, once encrypted in symbols, in manuscripts, in hidden gestures, now begin to reveal themselves more directly, for the need is urgent. The world cries out for truth, not as a concept, but as a vibration. And those who hear this call, even if they do not understand with the mind, will feel it with the soul, because the kingdom is closer than ever, and the keys have always been where they always were, within. There comes a point in the inner journey where all questions cease, not because they have been answered one by one, but because the need to ask disappears. This point marks the definitive crossing of the seeker, the moment where the kingdom ceases to be a concept, a longing, a possibility, to become a direct, living, pulsating reality. This is the hidden apex of the Order of the Three Keys. There is no coronation ceremony, no explosion of light, no audience. There is only total silence, the same that has always enveloped the mystery. The revelation is not an event, it is a recognition, and it does not come from outside in, but springs from the deepest part of oneself, like a sun that has always been shining behind a dense layer of internal clouds. When this sun is seen, not with the eyes but with the soul, everything changes, without anything needing to change. The kingdom is here, not as a metaphor, nor as a distant promise. It is present at this very moment, in the space between your thoughts, in the pause between your words, in the interval between one movement and another. It is in what you observe, and also in what is observed. The duality dissolves in this recognition, and what once seemed distant reveals itself as the only thing that has always been real. The Order, throughout the centuries, never wanted to be the center of worship, nor the bearer of exclusive truths. It merely guarded, like a silent mother, the thread of return. Its purpose was to protect, not to dominate, to preserve the sacred, not to sell illusions. And now, at the end of this cycle of remembrance, it whispers, one last time, the kingdom is now, and you are the door. The dissolution of the ego is not a destruction, but a liberation. It is the dropping of all masks, including the mask of the seeker, because even the search can become a prison, even practice can turn into a disguise. The final moment of awakening is when the seeker realizes there is nothing to achieve because they already are what they seek. This collapse of duality is the most radical of acts. It demands complete surrender, courage to no longer hide in spiritual roles, titles, rituals, or systems. The kingdom only reveals itself when the mind silences its last argument, when the identity releases its last attachment, when the soul, naked, remains. There is no way to teach this point. It can only be experienced, and once experienced, it transforms everything. The ancients used to say that the kingdom is too simple to be understood and too profound to be ignored. This apparent contradiction points to its paradoxical nature. It is in everything, but it is nothing. It is visible, but invisible. It can be touched by all, but cannot be owned by anyone. And precisely because of this, it is eternal, inviolable, indestructible. It cannot be threatened because it has never entered into conflict. It cannot be defended because it has never been attacked. It needs no proof, for it is the very foundation of reality. The silent revelation is, therefore, the return to this foundation. It is when you stop identifying with the surface and recognize yourself as the essence itself, not as a concept, but as an undeniable truth. This truth does not breed arrogance, but profound humility. Because in recognizing oneself as an indivisible part of the whole, the being perceives the sacred responsibility of keeping this vision alive in a world still asleep. Compassion blossoms naturally, not as a moral effort, but as an inevitable extension of the perceived unity. The suffering of others becomes one's own. The pain of another becomes a reflection, and love is no longer a choice, but a natural state. The kingdom expresses itself through simple gestures, a welcoming glance, a healing word, a silence that allows. Those who live in this state do not need to proclaim themselves enlightened. Their presence is the testimony, and where they are, the kingdom reveals itself. The order of the three keys, at this point, dissolves as a structure, because its mission is accomplished. It never intended to perpetuate itself as an institution. It was always a field of remembrance, a frequency of activation, a spiritual womb where transitioning souls could remember what they are. Now it becomes the awakened seeker itself. Every being that experiences the kingdom becomes a continuity of the order. Every conscious gesture, every aligned word, every loving silence is the new language of the invisible brotherhood. There is no longer a need to hide symbols, encode teachings, create maps. The truth now walks in living flesh, looks through human eyes, listens with attentive ears, touches with awakened hands. Still, the challenges remain, because the world as a system still turns based on illusion. It still stimulates fear, competition, consumption, fragmentation. Therefore, living the kingdom requires firmness, not a rigidity of posture, but an unwavering internal commitment to the perceived truth. The awakened seeker becomes a point of coherence amidst chaos, and their presence, even if silent, acts as a vibrational antidote, disarming mental structures around them, offering a living alternative to the dominant narrative. They do not impose, they propose, and their proposal is a permanent invitation. Remember, the integration of the kingdom's experience is an ongoing process. It does not end at the initial perception. The awakened consciousness needs to be embodied in everyday life, in relationships, in decisions, in speeches. The kingdom needs to descend from the top of the mountain to the market, the traffic, the common conversation. It is at this point that the real work begins. Because to illuminate oneself for moments is achievable. To remain luminous in the world's darkness is the challenge, and it is in this challenge that the order remains alive, not anymore as an esoteric fraternity, but as a silent presence in all those who dare to live the invisible in the visible, the eternal in the ephemeral, the one in the many. The final revelation is simple. There is no separation. There never was. Everything that seemed external is internal. Everything that seemed distant is now. The kingdom was not hidden. It was veiled, and the veil was the conditioned gaze itself. When the gaze changes, the world changes. And then, heaven does not need to be reached. It is recognized on earth. The walls between sacred and profane fall. The temples move inward. Prayer becomes breath. Silence becomes language. and life, in its entirety, is finally perceived as an expression of being. This perception doesn't need to be explained. It recognizes itself. When it arrives, everything falls into place. The losses make sense. The voids are filled. The cycles are completed. There's no longer urgency, nor haste, nor need for control. There's only presence. And this presence is everything. It's the end of the search, and the beginning of true existence. The order, in the end, smiles in silence, because it always knew that you would arrive here, that despite all the falls, distractions, fears, and doubts, at some point, you would remember, not with the mind, but with the being. And so, the last key no longer needs to be turned, because the door no longer exists. You have always been inside. The kingdom is you. When you no longer separate yourself from anything, it's the ground you walk on, the air you breathe, the sound you hear, the tear that falls. It's the living memory of the whole. And now that you know this, you don't need to do anything. Just live it. With every gesture, with every silence, with every heartbeat. Because the kingdom is here, and you, at last, are in it. And now that you have crossed the veil with us, mind unfettered, we want to know, what was the memory that touched you the most during this journey? Have you ever felt at any moment this silent whisper of the kingdom within you, even without knowing how to name it? Share in the comments with the phrase, "I carry the key too." Complete it with your feeling, vision, memory, or personal experience. This is your manifested vibration. And when we put this into words, we activate the field of collective memory. If you've made it this far, you're not alone. We are together igniting this dormant spark in humanity, and each comment, each share, is an echo that reverberates in the unseen. Comment. Read others' comments from Mind Unfettered, see yourself in them. This is our kingdom in manifestation. And if something within you still yearns for more, if you feel there is a veil beyond this veil and a prophecy that awaits only those ready to see with the eyes of the soul, then click on the video that appears on your screen now. The hidden prophecy of the three veils, what only the truly awakened can see. There we will unveil the veils that even the ancients hid from their own initiates, and why only the truly awakened can cross through. Mind Unfettered. This journey is yours. The kingdom is here, and together we manif.